We see swords many times in the Bible. Whether we take them literally or figuratively affects our view of prophecy and even our perception of God. Many places in the Bible we see utter destruction by God's people, either at his command or to fulfill his purpose. Men, women, children, even animals with the edge of the sword. There are many passages where there are multitudes slain by the edge of the sword. In both Testaments, the sword represents the Word of God. Here the sword comes out of the mouth, so it must be words rather than literal swords. Here the sword coming from the mouth is used to smite the nations, and then the birds eat the flesh of those that are slain by it. I think we need to be careful of mixing figurative and literal. If this sword is figurative, representing the Word of God because it comes from the mouth, then the other things are figurative also. Jesus said that unless we drink his blood and eat his flesh, there's no life in us. He wasn't talking about his literal blood and flesh, and this isn't talking about literal flesh being eaten either. John incorporates things from different parts of the Bible to put into his writing of Revelation. Here we have two passages that have a great multitude slain. If they were to be the same thing, if John took this from Ezekiel, then we should be able to learn more about both passages by sharing the details of each of them. In both passages, there are those that have a mark or a seal put onto their foreheads. Also consider that both Ezekiel and John had an experience before the throne, and both of them mention a book. Ezekiel doesn't mention that it was sealed, but he says it was bittersweet, and the book in Revelation, once it's opened, is also bittersweet. And John also says that the book was sealed. Then we can even go to Daniel with his sealed book and Isaiah with his sealed book. I believe they're all talking about the same thing. So we can get details from those sealed books and bring it on into Revelation. In the previous chapter in Revelation, we can see how the great multitude was slain. In verse 9, it says that they were slain for the word of God and for the testimony they held. But wait, back in verse 4, a few verses earlier, it says that there was a red horse rider that went out, and there was given him a great sword. Now, weren't they slain by this great sword? But it says they were slain for the word of God. The Greek word that is translated as for really means through or by, and it's usually translated that way. Apparently, the translators felt that they were physically slain, and so they didn't feel right about saying that they were slain by the word of God or through the word of God, because then they wouldn't be physically slain. The great multitude that was slain now serve God day and night in his temple. Were they physically slain and they're serving God day and night in a temple in heaven? Or were they spiritually slain through the word of God and now they're serving God day and night in the church, which is considered the temple of God all through the New Testament? First, I realized that the slaughter of the great multitude in Revelation was really great revival rather than physical martyrdom. Then I realized that the slaughter in Ezekiel was really the same thing because the details were so similar. Then I started wondering about the slaughters in the rest of the Bible. Here's one when Moses came down from the mountain and he saw them worshiping the calf. He said, "Who is on the Lord's side?" And all of the Levites gathered to him. He told them to put their swords by their side and go from gate to gate of the camp and basically swing your sword. It doesn't matter if it's every man his brother, his companion, or his neighbor. Didn't matter, just swing your swords. And there fell that day about 3,000 of the men. Now, this sounds literal and physical, but so did the slaughter in Ezekiel, and so did the slaughter in Revelation. And when the birds eat the flesh of those that are slain by the sword in Revelation 19. So, again, was this really a literal physical slaughter, or could it have been an allegory for a spiritual battle? Here's one where they utterly destroyed men, women, children, but they saved the virgins. For one thing, how would they know which ones are virgins in order to save them? Would they just ask them and say, well, if you're not a virgin, we're going to have to slay you with a sword? What about the children? Wouldn't have they been virgins? If this is figurative, we know that the sword represents the word. If that's figurative, everything else is figurative too. The men, women, children, and the virgins. Consider the parable of the sower. The sower sows a seed, the field receives it, and there's a conception, and there's a birth of the wheat. Now Jesus said that the seed represents the word. It's the same thing with people in religion. The preacher or teacher sows his seed, his doctrines. The congregation or the pupils receive it. They would be playing the part of the woman. And then there's conception, and there's birth. Now, if error was being sown and received and duplicated, then the male and the woman that had lain with the man and the spiritual children would all need to be slain by the word in order to get them into the truth. They could tell which ones were virgins because they wouldn't hold to the doctrines that were being taught. They wouldn't need to be slain by the sword